Across the games industry, workers are getting pretty damn pissed at their employers. Whether they are employed or on contracts, generally there's a bit of a shit deal. I mean, even some cases where QA testers are getting a worse deal than workers in, say, like, fast food. Which, obviously, no harm to people working fast food. I mean, I've worked fast food. Many people have. But you would expect that once you're in a more technical role, doing, like, quality assurance and stuff for a big games company making the big billions, you'd think you wouldn't be getting a shit deal. But people have been. So, the first thing to talk about is basically the wins that have happened and now the action that is being prompted, because there's a lot of fury going on, particularly at Ubisoft. Now, obviously, when all the Activision Blizzard stuff kicked off, we had the A Better ABK group appear and start to advocate for things. And that did lead to some big wins, like the removal of forced arbitration from their contracts in cases of sexual harassment and related retaliation. So not fully, but at least a good step. And also the likes of Bobby Kotick taking a major pay cut and Activision Blizzard making more investments. So that was broadly received. More work to be done, but good. Now, more recently, things got a bit grim when the focus turned over to the situation for temporary contract workers at Activision Blizzard who have historically been denied all the perks of being a full employee. That's, of course, from, salary to leave and other things. And things were actually looking a bit rougher last week when A Better ABK, the employee advocacy group, reported on mandatory unpaid holiday leave, which doesn't look great, does it? Now, this caused a lot of support for the temp workers, the services they provide, which are essential, and this has actually led to a compensation overhaul. So this does actually prove, like, if people get pissed off, ultimately the company recognizes it needs these people. It needs them to work. So that's the thing. It needs them to work, which is why they've went and done this change decently quickly, but it kind of just does show that they were obviously being undervalued and exploited. So there's a minimum hourly pay bump from $13 to $17. Then on January 1st, 2022, all temp workers will receive 13 paid holidays each year. And our agency partners have agreed to match the sick paid time off that we offer to Blizzard temporary employees, increasing the number of accruable sick time to 9 days each year. So this is a massive win for these temp workers. This is so much better than the deal that they had. But I think especially for many outside of the US context, and even lots of people in the US with their employers, it still doesn't look like a particularly good deal. And especially if you think about the locations involved. Somebody reached out to us in an email, I remember that time, saying they were getting it was in and around $13 for doing QA for Activision, and that was in SoCal.
Yeah.
$13 an hour in Southern California, where the Bobby Kotick's minimum salary he can legally get is $62,000 a year. I mean, what? Seems a little bit weird. So, here's somebody saying $17 an hour. I just drove by a Wendy's that said they're offering $17.50 an hour for starting wages. Now, that's $15 an hour USD because that was Canadian. But, as things go, like a QA tester is a decently technical role.
Yeah, and it's not even just that it's like decently technical. It's that it is grueling work as well. It is grueling work, and it's so unbelievably undervalued. I think because it used to have the consideration of being the starting, that's where you start. Yeah. You start in QA, you do your time down there, and then you get a game design job. But now, with the sheer amount of QA that's needed for massive, massive systems, it's like how you don't put so much effort into QA to make sure you... Because they're the ones who spot everything wrong with your game.
Yeah, and actually there was a thread going on recently. People say, hire more QA. It actually turns out a lot of these cases, QA have known about these bugs for ages. Yep. The bugs go to the developers, and the developers either don't fix them or just don't have the time because they have their dates. So the whole thing's a bit of a weird mismatch. Now, this is more than just QA workers. It's just that QA does happen to be a sector of games where there is a lot of temp work being done, but there's obviously lots of other roles that that would be a temp contract basis too. And here's another example. For everyone questioning the $17 and wondering why that's a win, I currently make less than that as a senior QA at $16.50 an hour, And I started, I think, at 1350 as a standard tester. This is from F Blake on Twitter, and somebody did reach out to us in our email pretty much with that same number. So that must have been roughly a starting temp QA, number, which is kind of insane. Here's somebody else saying, 2018, the rate at QAMN was $11 an hour. Somebody saying, I take basic tech support calls and make tickets. I make $45K a year. Anything less than 18 an hour is an insult to the skills and work. I'm glad to see progress, but you deserve more. I think that's generally what people are thinking here. So it is a good thing that these people's real world situations are all going to get better. But it does highlight disparities within the industry, and I think QA being extremely important, but not really appreciated. Maybe there's this weird thing where they know that QA finds all the bugs, but they're like, well, the limiting factor isn't QA. The limiting factor is developers and developer time. Therefore, we're free to undervalue QA as much as we want. Maybe that's the kind of culture and thinking that goes into it. I've certainly heard many tales of even dev teams kind of considering QA second-class citizens, so...
Yeah. I mean, I can see how that would happen whenever QA are constantly, firing bugs at devs, and devs are just like, fuck, we don't have time to solve all of these. Can you stop sending us bug reports for shit that doesn't matter? Because it's just, all I have to do is fill out the form and say, known shippable, known shippable, known shippable all day long. Bastard QA doing this on me. You can see how the kind of the us versus them could arise there. But I think the reason for so much QA being necessary, I think, is probably like out of fear. Because you kind of think of how, obviously, not a whole bunch of experience in QA and stuff like that, but like logically speaking, you would need to throw a lot of bodies at a problem to find game-breaking bugs in highly complicated systems, especially highly complex systems that are developed under crunch. Because, like how many game-breaking bugs did they fix in Cyberpunk before it went live? How many were missed? And like, you can obviously get really good QA staff can find bugs, but given the nature of bugs in games like that, you literally just need bodies thrown at it to, the chance of testing this most insane combination of very small things is so slim that you just need 1,000 people to be fired at it or 10,000 people fired at it to actually have it done. So I think it's kind of that, where it's like, quality obviously matters, but quantity is probably gonna be what stops the game-breaking bug from shipping.
Part of it's like a human can only look into so many things, and if there's a lot of things to be looked into. And I guess also with Cyberpunk, like complexity, dev team being in crunch, even if they had the best QA in the world, they probably didn't have the resources to action on that essential feedback.
Definitely.
So that's what's been going on with Activision Blizzard. There's actually a great win for those temp workers that does highlight there being more progress being needed. But all of this has felt funny to the people with Ubisoft. They formed a better Ubisoft. Kind of sounds a bit like a better ABK. The difference, though, is they had made a lot less progress. They had not been responded to. They did their open letter, all of that, talking about the need for real change, saying that they've had a year of empty words and shit, but really nothing important has been done. They stated their key demands. They did all of these things. And, Ubisoft, acknowledge we have a problem to solve, all of that. But reportedly hadn't really done, they'd done some PR and all of that, but they hadn't really done a lot of the hard work. Now, this led to a public petition. This was launched by a better Ubisoft on the 100th anniversary of them still waiting for a meaningful response from their management. So this is something for, for players, for customers to do. And, of course, They did this via tweet that is parodying the whole, the Far Cry 6 promo email of, you've only played for 30 minutes, you disappoint me, or whatever. So they're doing that, playing a little bit cute with what their own company's marketing department has done. So I would say, fill out the petition if that is something that interests you, absolutely. So yeah, they've done that. Now, there has been a little bit of change from Ubisoft. It's maybe, almost certainly not the change they specifically were talking about, though. So there's a problem Ubisoft have had of staff turnover. And this is an extremely important thing. It's an extremely large problem in the industry. And it is churn. From what I understand, gaming does lose a lot of people to tech. Because over in the tech sector, you can basically do similar skill sets, make a bunch more money, get better benefits, and have better work conditions. I mean, why stay in games then? You might say for passion, and I think for a lot of people, that'll keep them there for 10 years. But when they reach their highest levels of competency and seniority, maybe they have a family, they're like, okay, I really love video games, but you know what? If I didn't have to crunch all the time, and I worked in a tech company and got more money, maybe I'd be able to play more goddamn video games. You wonder why sometimes it feels like game devs don't play games. It can end up just being that they're crunching into oblivion and literally don't have the hours to play games. I think that leads to more than just being in their own little bubbles.
Yeah.
So there's all that going on. Now, what Ubisoft have basically had is an issue with, we think anyway, churning employees. That's what it seems to be. And because of this, they are combating it. Now, they're not really combating it by addressing any of the things that a better ABK have talked about. They're combating it with money. Money talks. Money does have a very real-world impact to people, so money is important. It's just that those other things from a better ABK are also important. These raises are being implemented immediately across the board at Ubisoft Canada, but the way that it's done does see the employees who are earning the most seeing the biggest increases. Now, for a lot of people, that's going to be very annoying, but I think from Ubisoft's perspective, you could see that, they can afford to lose a junior more than they can afford to lose a senior staffer who, not only is that person very competent and knows fundamentally all the technologies they're working with, but they'll also know Ubisoft-specific internal processes, Ubisoft-specific implementation of things, and all of that's really, really, really important. Now, you would think maybe, 5-10% pay rise across the board, and of course 10% of 50 grand is 5 grand, 10% of 100 grand is 10 grand, therefore the people at the top will get more. It's actually a bit more extreme than that. So according to a better Ubisoft, junior staff are getting a 5 to 7% increase, while most senior staff could see their pay be increased by up to 20%. So a lower level developer on a 50 grand a year salary could get another 2.5 grand, which I mean certainly is a nice thing, but a higher level developer making 100 grand could actually be getting 20 grand in additional pay, which is quite a bit more. So this is going to be good for all those developers. They're going to get more compensation. I'm sure they'll be happy with that. But there's some of those other key demands that have not been met. And there is a gap that has now been exacerbated because of the specific implementation of this. And I think you can see where Ubisoft's goals, really needing to retain their most high-value staff, versus the employees' goals, which is, more cohesion, a bit more, I guess like a bit more equity across the board. Just everyone being raised up. The employees' goals maybe aren't being as met as much. So there you go. And there is a more, a blandly marketable company line. They said to Kotaku all of this, and they said, we will do another adjustment in April as usual. This is the first of a number of initiatives we are announcing to provide a competitive employer offer as a part of our broader ongoing changes. We will have to see. Number one, Ubisoft Singapore. Will anything happen there? Check out our Skull and Bones video from a good while ago. And if this is the first in an initiative changes, what are the others going to be?
Yeah, I feel like, because there's the cynical way of looking at this, which is, fuck it, we'll give them a raise and they'll say that's okay, they'll keep them around. We won't need it anymore than that. We'll just throw them, we'll throw them a little bit of a raise, and that's, sure, it's a drain on the accounts, but it's fine. We'll get to keep the people, and we won't have to do any of the really important changes. But there is also the kind of thing of, well, changes like that take time. And if they are trying to solve deep problems with their corporate culture and stuff, that's going to take time. They'll need to figure that out a little bit, which means that pay might be the first, just literally the shit. What can we do now to stop turnover from just really going bad? Shit, offer them money. Because everything else we can offer them is a promise. We can offer them promises to action, but we can't make those quick changes immediately. Or we can't make those changes immediately because they take time. So the thing we can do right now, which is, almost, they're basically putting a deposit down on change. In a way. They're just going, okay, we'll give you money. If you hang around, we promise we'll fix everything else. So there is that, which I think is interesting. But there's just that idea of, man, the idea of having to keep seniors but letting juniors go. I feel like that kind of calls back to the things that happen at QA, where they're all treated poorly and underpaid and stuff like that. Because I know, actually, going back a little bit, there was that Blake, who's talking about their thing. I remember seeing their Twitter account a while ago, and it's that person's not got a good time working at Activision as a QA tester. Like, it is just the sheer amount of overtime that's done all the time in order to pay stuff. Obviously, it's their own personal opinion, so they're going to, they're going to embellish it, whatever else, naturally, because it's their personal Twitter account. But it just seems like it's not a good way to be. And then you're thinking, well, if you're focusing on seniors, and then you'll maybe move to work on juniors. Well, juniors are just seniors who aren't seniors yet. So I think the entire industry has this problem of like churning through all these staff, forcing them out, and you're like, well, obviously they can go to other industries, but it's a case of you really should be paying most attention to the newer staff, the younger staff, the promising staff. I know it hasn't worked out too well for them, so far at least, but like that's what Platinum Games were doing. They were like, no, well, this young blood, if we can fire them up, if we can fire them up and teach them as many lessons as we can, then throw projects at them, they're going to do the maddest shit. Whereas everywhere else is kind of like, no, we need our best seniors to work on all these projects, and the juniors can just sort of fill in work for them. I feel like that's a pretty bad attitude that a lot of these companies kind of have. Obviously, it's kind of out of necessity because they're growing quickly, and you can't, the same way you can't change your culture overnight, you can't turn a new employee into an experienced employee overnight. But it's that case of long-term investment in, obviously in your players, of course, but obviously also investing in your employees and in your staff over time is one of these things that just feels like it's missing a lot of the time here.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we're just left thinking, is there going to be more to come here? We've seen Bungie make a bunch of good changes for their staff. Eidos Montreal testing out a 4-day work week. And look, with a 4-day work week, it's the sort of thing, if it turns out that you can get the same amount of work done in slightly fewer hours, well, that's just more efficient for everyone involved. Efficiency is more important than almost a Warhammer 40k sort of Imperium of Man, just throw bodies and time at the problem sort of style of thinking. So hopefully that gets better. Of course, Rockstar, they were very much in the shit. And I believe a sort of a 1 year later follow-up said that actually some good steps have been made here. Mm-hmm. So overall, what this means for people in the games industry should be keep the pressure up. It can actually work. And for the customers, you might not feel this stuff now, but do remember whenever Marty O'Donnell was his thing about, the developers of the Golden Goose. If you want the Golden Goose to keep on laying golden eggs, keep that goose happy, well-fed, treat it reasonably. And then the Activision person was like, but what about foie gras? How this matters to you purely as a customer is teams that don't have to crunch all the time will release better games with less bugs, less problems. You know that Cyberpunk thing? They're crunching in that game for basically forever. Because I know there's people saying, the mandatory stuff was only towards the end. Yeah, true. But the soft sort of social coercion stuff, that was going on for numerous reports. Way longer. And all that means is that even if QA finds all the bugs in the goddamn universe, the development process has been so banjaxed that they can't actually action on any of the feedback. Or can't action on all of it, which is why we get so many bugs and issues in our games. Which, for customers, and for being very pro-consumer only here, that's what we want. Yeah. So the sort of the immediate impact of this is better working conditions. The further down the line impact is better games. People love what Insomniac have done recently. Yep. From what I understand, they've had no crunch in their projects.
Absolutely.
They have generally, I think, been high quality, haven't been buggy. It's all been thumbs up.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there are bugs that slip through the cracks for both the Spider-Man games that were but they were, this is affected 1 in a million people and no one really minds too much. It's not like a Cyberpunk thing where all the game's unplayable. And it's but everything else in those games is just, I don't want to say perfect, but in terms of with what they tried to do, almost perfect. Same with Ratchet. And you're like, well, you can tell this game was made by people who worked really, really, really hard, but then, didn't work really hard 80 hours a week. They went home and they had a decent night's sleep and they came back out the next day and made something great out of all of that effort. And I think that's the thing where exploitation of people in this way, I think, is a short-term strategy. And none of these companies are here short-term.
Yeah.
We've had all of these companies for years and years and years, for decades now. So it's about time they actually start to think, well, what about 10 years in the future? What about 20 years in the future? Because they're happy to talk about those plans in terms of IP, but they never talk about it like with their staff. And that's the one thing that irks me quite often.
Big. Yeah, no, absolutely big. And I mean, to keep this on topic, but also do a little bit of sly self-promo, I actually believe it's the day this video is going up. The Pale Beyond will be revealed. Our game studio will be revealed. And it's like, as time goes on, hopefully, obviously, the game sells well. And when it does, some of the things that me and Thomas are thinking about is, okay, how do we translate this thing being successful into making this a better place to work for everyone involved? Because we know from experience running a fucking studio that if you do those things right, that when people actually, when people are having good times, productivity goes up. So even from a cold hard perspective, like you want your...
Yeah.
Even as if you were just an evil bottom line only focused bastard.
Yeah.
Long term, people being... just having a great work environment, that's long-term net benefit. It's good. It is good business to treat people well. Mm-hmm. It's just that it might not be good business in this quarter, but it's going to be good business in 1 year or 2 years because that's building your long-term company. I mean, think about all these companies that have lost their senior programmers, lost their senior architects, lost their Omar Gonzalez type people. Omar Gonzalez, big man for classic WoW, great Blizzard developer. Like, you start losing all these people, what's going to happen to your games? It's going to be shit. So you should treat them fucking well.
Yeah, you've lost 10, 15, sometimes 20 years of expertise.
Yeah, so it is good business to offer the best you can as an employer, basically. So that's it for us. Check out the game reveal. Wahoo! And with that said, see you next time.